Well, good morning. Good morning. Oh, wait a minute. I know we've been away for a long time, but good morning. Good morning. We didn't stay in isolation for 2.5 years to not be in celebration when we're in front of one another. It looks much worse than it is with the crutch and everything. For those of you who I don't know, I'm just meeting for the first time, you're probably thinking, oh, he works with that crutch pretty well. But for other people, they're like, oh my God, he's got a crutch. What happened? What did they do to it? Everything's fine. It's all fine. I'm Mark Fowler. It has been my joy to actually be speaking at New Thought Spiritual Center of Eastern Long Island for over 9 years. This is only the second sermon that I have given in person since the pandemic began. So I'm just honored to be here, and to all of my friends and colleagues who are joining us from Zoom, love you and thank you so much for making the time at home to be with us today. So we've come quite a long way, and we still have hills to climb. That even with all that we have survived and somehow managed to thrive in the midst of, there's still work to do. And I know sometimes that can just get annoying. Like there's kind of like this experience of life, particularly for spiritual people, where you're just kind of like, it wasn't that enough. Like, wasn't that enough? Like the last 2 years and everything that happened, like, wasn't that enough sacrifice? Like, I mean, like, I don't know if I've got any more sacrifice left. And the bad news is that sacrifice doesn't operate on a scale. Like you can't get a sale, like good times don't go on sale and you get to buy them in bulk and color. That's not how this works. And I was looking at the theme for the month, which is the word. And I thought that that was interesting, and it made me think differently, because sometimes word has been the theme of the month, or people focus on word, particularly as a dynamic of New Thought spirituality. But when you add that preposition, and we begin talking about the word, then there's a little bit of a different dynamic that begins to take place. Some of you who I may not have met yet, I am very fond of the Gospel according to Merriam-Webster. Because often in the dictionary, we actually can get some clarity about the words we use and throw around quite freely and openly. So here are a couple of definitions I think most applicable to what we're talking about in terms of how word is actually defined. So one example of word, and they make mention in the dictionary, in Merriam-Webster, that it's often capitalized when talking about these definitions. The expressed or manifested mind and will of God. I didn't make that up, it's in the dictionary. The expressed or manifested mind and will of God. Word is also defined as gospel. That is actually one of the definitions of word. And the definition of that, the message concerning Christ, the kingdom of God and salvation. And another definition of gospel, the message or teachings of a religious teacher. And then word is also defined as logos, a root word that talks about the divine wisdom manifest in the creation government and redemption of the world, and often identified with the second person of the Trinity. Now, what's interesting is when I think about word or even the word, I didn't think about any of this. I often am focusing more on what's coming out of my mouth or evaluating the words that are coming at me. But I'm going to suggest that if we find ourselves focusing solely on the words that come out of our mouth and solely those kind of words that emerge from our minds and hearts, that's important. And there's a deeper level to go for us if we are thinking about making manifest the mind and will of God. That there is more that we can do with the word as a dynamic rather than just a thought or a condition. So I want to give you 3 questions to think about as I talk about this myth of the word. Subtitle, Hear, Be, Do. How do you respond when you hear the word? Capital T, capital W. How do you respond when you hear the word? Second question, am I the word? Is my living, are the actions of my life consistent with the manifested will of God? Easy question. And the third question, what am I doing for the word? What am I doing that is in service of the manifested mind and will of God? So those are 3 questions for us to think about. The first myth that I want to talk about is that we know the word, capital T, capital W. We know the word when we're in the presence of it, that we actually know it. Ernest Holmes says this about the word. Modern science is revealing many things that the great thinkers of the ages have announced. One of them is that matter is in a constant state of flow. It is like a river flowing in, out, and on. It is operated upon by an unseen force or law and takes its form through some agency which science supposes to be the will and purpose of spirit. This we call the word. All things were made by the word. Now, what's interesting is that Ernest Holmes wrote this in 1926, almost 100 years ago. So when he talks about modern science, he's talking about modern science from 100 years ago. Add a few years for when modern science started actually taking the time to think about the ways in which the natural world is operated on by things that are unexplainable, that we didn't even have language to express. And that this edition that I'm reading from was published in 2013. But like the dictionary definition, Holmes references the word to be the will and purpose of spirit. So going back to this question or the statement, this myth that we know the word when we're in the presence of it, when you think of the expression, the word, do you think we're talking about the will and purpose of spirit? And where have you been lately? Where you were clear, you were in the presence of the will and or the purpose of spirit. Now, what's interesting to me is that there are lots of different ideas about what the pandemic meant and what it continues to mean today. But where is the will and the purpose of spirit in this dynamic that we have been experiencing around the planet together at the same time for more than 2 years? Could the simplest lesson be that we are inextricably connected to one another, despite all our protestations about our individual rights and what we want and what we need, that fundamentally we cannot escape, as much as we'd like to be on an island by ourselves, we cannot escape that we are part of an intricate design that is being acted upon by the will and purpose of spirit, and we have something to do with that. I've been walking around with this crutch. I actually have two. I use this as the cane crutch for 3 weeks, almost 3 weeks. And the instruction from the doctor is to be on these crutches for 4 to 6 weeks. Can I tell you what I learned in 2 days of navigating New York City on 2 sticks? Friday was the first time I braved the subway and began thinking about things that I never think about, which is, does that station have an elevator? And oh my God, is it working? I've just been thinking about things that are impacting my life in a way that I've never had to think about it. I'm 58 years old, but now I have a lesson about the will and the purpose of spirit, that I might understand what it is to operate in life differently abled for however long that is. And that has been the life experience for some people since their birth. We have some things to do. We are in the presence of the will and the purpose of spirit every day. And notice it not. So maybe let's talk about that for a minute. The second thing is that we are the Word. So I ask you a question to consider: am I the Word? Is my life, are the results of my life a testament to this idea of the will and purpose of spirit? And the reality is that we are words every moment of every day. Word creates world. Every word that we think becomes, and even say or hear, becomes a world. Yes. No. Maybe. I'm not sure. Get away from me. Words that we create worlds moment by moment. And just think about it just take today as an example. From the time you woke up, what are the words you've been? Maybe grateful, maybe happy, joyful, understanding, gracious, loving, patient, kind, or not. Maybe some other words. Maybe. But if the word is the will and purpose of spirit, there's something for us to be conscious and active about: how am I being that? How am I being the will and purpose of spirit? Because if word indeed does create world and does create reality, what have you created today? And what are you creating? And bearing in mind that the word is conscious, intentional, knowing of spirit. And that there's an opportunity for us to be that. But there's also something for us to be responsible about, that we are manifesting something every moment, every day, all the time, as long as we're drawing breath. The gentleman that was mentioned, there are going to be at least 2 memorial services for the word. Somehow, the result of his life has been something that people want to gather and celebrate. That somewhere in who he's been and what he's said and what he's done is an example of the will and purpose of spirit. What we say and how we are makes a difference. You make a difference. And we have to be conscious and responsible about that. Third and final myth, we do the word. We do the word. This comes from the book of James in the English Standard Version of the Bible. It comes from the first chapter, verses 22 through 24. And it says, "But be doers of the word, and not hearers only, deceiving yourselves. For if anyone is a hearer of the word and not a doer, they are like a person who looks intently at their natural face in a mirror. For they look at themselves and go away, and at once forget what they were like. But the one who looks into the perfect law, the law of liberty, and perseveres, being no hearer who forgets, but a doer who acts, they will be blessed in their doing." So, how could we be a hearer of the word? Perhaps we hear about something that we believe, like we hear it, we hear account of it, and we believe that it is an example of the purpose and will of spirit. We hear about someone who doesn't act that we believe is a result of the will and purpose of spirit. We can see the presence of the will and purpose of spirit and believe, well, that's not me. I'm not there yet. And is it sounding familiar? One day, I'll really come into my full self, and then I'll be able to make the kind of difference in the world that I want. When we are doers of the word, we see ourselves as manifestations of the will and purpose of spirit, no matter how raggedy it looks, no matter how much of the Cinderella story of your spiritual life has not come to be yet. Like the fairy godmother hasn't shown up yet, like that. Like no transformation of mice and pumpkins, like that hasn't happened yet. But in the midst of your rags and ashes and whatever your life is, we are yet expressions of the will and purpose of spirit. When we walk away from that mirror and remember who we are, then we're not driven by, or at least not as easily distracted by ego. But we become present to a reality that we are the will and purpose of Spirit. And we take actions that are consistent with that reality. We know the word, we be the word, and we do the word. And when we do that, then no good thing cannot happen. But when we walk away from the mirror and forget who we are and whose we are, when we walk away as if we have no responsibility for what's happening, that's when the shenanigans begin. So today I encourage you, know the word, capital T, capital W. Be the word. Do the word. God bless you.